Destruction and devastation. Hurricane Irma wreaks havoc in Florida over the weekend. Millions are still in the dark. We'll tell you where the weakened storm is heading next. Remembering September 11th. 16 years after the terror attacks, our country continues to mourn. Calling for a change of heart. Strong words from Catholic bishops to the Philippines president. And the Holy Father is back in Rome. What the Pope had to say about President Trump on the papal plane. We'll have a report with our new Vatican correspondent, Juliet Lindley, on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, September 11th, 2017. Thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Irma is now a tropical storm, but its power is unmistakable. The storm has brought torrential rain, flooding, strong winds, and power outages to Florida, and it's not done yet. Utter devastation throughout the Sunshine State. Hurricane Irma tore through southwest Florida yesterday, bringing down trees and a lot of debris in its wake. Governor Rick Scott says he's been in close contact with the White House.
We're working very closely with the federal government to make sure Floridians have the resources they need for this storm.
I mean, the bad news is that this is some big monster, but I think we're very well coordinated.
Irma brought wind up to 130 miles per hour. Nearly 5 million people are without power. And now neighboring states are bracing for Irma. A state of emergency has been declared for all of Georgia's 159 counties. Alabama officials are also getting ready to face the wrath of Irma.
This is an all-hands-on-deck event, and all of our state agencies are working together to ensure the safety of all Alabamians and of those who have recently sought refuge in our state.
Irma spent a record-setting 3 days as a Category 5 hurricane and is the strongest Atlantic Basin hurricane ever recorded outside of the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea. At least one Florida death is being blamed on Irma. At least 34 people have died throughout the Caribbean as the hurricane blew through, including 10 in Cuba. Riding the storm out with prayer, people across Florida are asking for God's protection as Hurricane Irma rumbles through. Jason Calvi shares this story of faith in the midst of a storm.
It's just very emotional.
The Ross family fights traffic to return to their home near Tampa. They fled Hurricane Irma, taking shelter with family near Orlando, only to dodge tornadoes plowing through.
I'm just thankful we're all okay. Everything that's important is in this car.
This Catholic family took comfort praying together.
And it makes you wonder sometimes if this wasn't God's way of saying, hey, I'm in charge. Remember me. Remember praying as a family and all those things. So, you try to have positive thoughts like that.
They're not alone. With Hurricane Irma taking aim at Tampa, 6 Protestant families joined their voices in prayer. Today, Tampa Bay Catholic High Flood writes, "Don't tell me that prayer doesn't work. This megastorm could have been so much more destructive." Irma's 100-plus mile-per-hour winds toppled one of St. Leo University's largest trees.
You could hear the wind howling outside the doors and stuff.
But the storm spared the students, hunkered down on campus.
I did hear a lot of people were talking about praying and stuff in the building and stuff. And I have friends from out of state. They were like, are you okay? Like, are you safe? Like, I'll pray for you.
It was a really good bonding experience between the whole community.
While Irma's most powerful punch has moved north, the Ross family still worries what they'll find when they finally get home.
It was scary. It was scary. And now we're really terrified because we don't know if our home is okay. So.
And the Ross family asks for our prayers, and I'm sure the millions of other Floridians would appreciate that too. Greg Ross says one of his prayers was already answered, even though the tornadoes knocked down several trees during the peak of the storm. He says it was like the hand of God, safely laying each of them down so they didn't hit his father's home. Lauren?
Wow. What about St. Leo University in St. Leo? Tell me about the damage.
Right. Well, right now they're still reviewing. It looks like they're okay, but the students just finished a massive Thanksgiving to thank God that they made it through the hurricane all right.
Other stories you must have heard from the Ross family.
Exactly. I mean, just incredible stories, and they're on their way back to Tampa. They live in a barrier island near Tampa, and they're just really worried that their home is going to be severely damaged.
Well, it was amazing that we could talk to them in the car as they were driving through the miracle of FaceTime, and you interviewing them from here. So thank you so much, Jason, for doing that story. The Caribbean islands of St. Martin, Anguilla, Barbuda, and others took a beating working on recovery efforts. Catholic Relief Services. They have offices in Haiti and in the Dominican Republic. Sean Callahan, President and CEO of Catholic Relief Services, joins us now. Thank you so much for taking time out of what must be a very busy time.
Pleasure to be here.
Put Hurricane Irma in perspective for us. As it hit the Caribbean, how devastating?
Incredibly devastating. Category 5, winds up to 185 miles an hour. And if you can imagine being in what we would consider a shack, a clapboard house, and feeling the wind and the rain raging through it, I mean, frightening for the people who are involved.
Well, Barbuda decimated, 95%. How will you be helping?
So we're working with the Caritas, local Caritas organizations, which is the Catholic Church organizations. We've already provided them some technical assistance before the emergency hit so that they knew how to prepare themselves and get ready for it. And then we have assessment teams on the ground with our local partners reviewing what needs to be done now.
A lot of the islands devastated by Irma are territories by the U.S. and European countries, and French President Emmanuel Macron is expected to visit St. Martin tomorrow. The British government has pledged $42 million. The European Union has released $2.4 million to help these Caribbean islands. Does that dwarf the amount that you are putting into this?
It doesn't. I think it's a combination effort that all of these different countries and agencies provide the assistance. So we go out for the poorest of the poor, work with the local church on those who aren't receiving the aid, and then try to uplift them with shelter materials, tarps to begin with, but then repairing their homes. And we're with them for the long term. Sometimes some emergency assistance comes in and is just for that short term, but we're there for the longer term.
And we had a correspondent in Haiti who was there a year after Hurricane Matthew hit in 2016. I know that your organization and Caritas had been there. How difficult is it to repair hurricane after hurricane and to be there for those people who really have nothing?
You know, for those who we can assist ahead of time, and that's the key, is preparing, and we call it disaster risk reduction, assisting them so that they build their houses in a way that they won't be destroyed. But I also responded to Hurricane Matthew, and a lot of the fishing communities just along the coast were washed away. When you get surges of 12 feet so that the water coming in was 20 feet high, the houses are actually underwater. So that's very, very difficult. The other thing is livelihoods. In Haiti, many of the livelihoods were washed away. We had a cacao project. Many of the trees were damaged, and it can take 3 years for them to repair the agriculture after a devastating storm.
And wells, I would imagine, are also impacted, drinking water. It is, what you're doing is such an amazing service, and I'm very grateful that you took time to come to EWTN News Nightly. Sean Callahan, President and CEO of Catholic Relief Services.
Thank you.
President Trump leads his first commemoration of the anniversary of 9/11. The president says the living soul of America wept for each of the nearly 3,000 lives lost on that day 16 years ago. Mark Irons joins us from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump used today's anniversary to warn terrorists that Americans cannot be intimidated. He marked 9/11 with ceremonies at the White House and Pentagon, saying, "No force on earth can break us apart." President Trump and the First Lady observe a moment of silence at the exact moment a hijacked plane slammed into the World Trade Center. Later, the president visited the Pentagon, one of the 3 sites attacked on September 11th, 2001.
The horror and anguish of that dark day were seared into our national memory forever. It was the worst attack on our country since Pearl Harbor, and even worse because this was an attack on civilians.
Vice President Pence told an audience in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that the passengers aboard the plane that crashed there may have saved his life. Pence recalled being a congressman and learning that the Capitol was a possible target of the hijacked plane.
I and many others in our nation's capital were able to go home that day to hug our families because of the courage and selflessness of the heroes of Flight 93.
In New York, victims were remembered by name.
Paul Dario Cirioli. Dad, this is Brady. He's your first grandson.
The president, a native New Yorker who was in the city that day, has praised the first responders who rushed to the Twin Towers. Trump says he lost hundreds of friends that day and has mentioned knowing Father Michael Judge, a Catholic priest who died while serving as a chaplain to the fire department. But he has also criticized President George W. Bush's handling of the attacks, saying he failed in his duty to keep Americans safe. President Trump said today American forces are pursuing and destroying the enemies of all civilized people. He also remembered the 7,000 U.S. service members who have given their lives fighting terrorists around the globe. Lauren.
So hard to watch. Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. President Trump's administration wins a small victory at the Supreme Court as Justice Anthony Kennedy grants their request for strict enforcement of a temporary ban on refugees. The temporary order blocks a lower court ruling allowing refugees to enter the United States if a resettlement agency has agreed to take them in. The administration filed for the legal stay under the Supreme Court. Could hear the arguments around the underlying immigration case. Those arguments are on the docket for October 10th. Former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon continues to lash out at the Republican establishment. During an interview with 60 Minutes aired yesterday, Bannon says Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and House Speaker Ryan are among Republicans trying to nullify the 2016 election. Both lawmakers have not commented on that statement. Bannon left the Trump administration last month. ISIS militants ambush a police convoy in Egypt, killing 18 police officers and injuring 7 others. It's one of the deadliest attacks this year in the Sinai Peninsula. There has been a wave of attacks in recent years, mainly targeting security forces. More than 80% of Portugal is suffering from severe drought conditions. It's among the worst in more than 20 years in that country. A reservoir where people usually swim and boat is almost dry. The country's environment secretary blames the drought on climate change. North Korean President Kim Jongun appears at a concert to celebrate the country's recent nuclear test. State media says the audience at the performance included people who had worked on North Korea's latest test. Filipino bishops and Catholic leaders are speaking out against the country's president, Rodrigo Duterte, and his deadly crackdown on drugs. The Archbishop of Manila tells the Vatican News Organization the country cannot be governed by violence. He's asking for a change of heart. Bishops in the Philippines are asking for prayers. Pope Francis wraps up his Colombia trip with a deeply personal final day on Sunday, honoring St. Peter Claver. Claver is a fellow Jesuit who ministered to hundreds of thousands of African slaves who arrived in the port of Cartagena. The Pope visited his tomb and said St. Peter Claver should serve as a model for the Catholic Church today. Pope Francis held a mass in Cartagena port and traveled to Colombia to help solidify the deal and encourage Colombians to reconcile. As the Holy Father left Colombia, heading back to Rome on the papal plane, he addressed reporter questions about immigration policy, including Italy's new policy of stopping migrant departures from Libya and President Trump's decision to end a program here for young immigrants in the United States. This comes as California sues the Trump administration over that decision. Juliet Lindley is EWTN News Nightly's brand new Vatican correspondent. She joins us from Rome, as she will most evenings. Welcome to the team.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It is a pleasure to have you. Now tell us, what did the Pope say about protecting young immigrants on his trip?
Pope Francis emphasized on the plane coming back from Colombia to Rome the importance of not separating young people from their families. He expressed the desire that the DACA changes would be rethought, and he very much said that he knows that President Donald Trump speaks as a pro-life man, and therefore he very much hopes that he will understand the importance of family unity.
Journalists also asked the Holy Father about Venezuela and the crisis there. How did he respond?
The Holy Father has often spoken out against the violence in Venezuela. He did so yesterday at the end of his Angelus prayer in Cartagena on the last day in Colombia, and again today on the plane. He expressed his desire to find a peaceful solution to this crisis that is not just political but also humanitarian and that is impacting the poor. But on the plane, he specifically called on the United Nations to step in and lend a hand to end this crisis.
How successful do you think this trip was? Did the Holy Father achieve his objectives?
The theme of this trip, Lauren, was let's take a first step. And indeed, steps were taken. The pontiff met with victims and relatives of the civil war and encouraged them to forgive and put the past behind them. He also met with former rebels. And while he was there, the leader of the former rebel group, FARC, published an open letter expressing regret for the great loss of life. As you know, more than 260,000 people were killed in more than 5 decades of violence, and asking for forgiveness. That said, the Pope also said one step isn't enough. This is an ongoing journey, and he encouraged the people of Colombia to not stay at a standstill and to continue to embrace peace. Now, it's not easy because, as you know, Lauren, there is skepticism in Colombia because of this peace deal. Last year, it was rejected in a referendum, and a lot of people feel that the rebels were let off too lightly and that perhaps it goes against their religious values. So not easy, but as the Pope said, let us embrace peace and move forward.
Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly, brand new Vatican correspondent. Thank you for joining us, and we are looking forward to seeing you as a vibrant member of our team out of Rome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
A bit of papal mishap on the last day of his trip left Pope Francis with a black eye. The Pope mobile suddenly stopped. The Holy Father lost balance, hit his head, and cut the area around his eyebrow. The Vatican spokesman says the Pope is fine. And the Pope joked, saying, "Somebody punched me." For all things related to the Pope's visit to Colombia, visit our partners right now at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Coming up, ahead of the opening of the UN General Assembly, a prayer service is taking place at a Catholic church. We'll have a preview from New York City. Pivotal pro-life moment in Ohio. The Ohio Supreme Court will decide whether to shut down Toledo's last abortion clinic. In 2014, the state shut down the clinic for lack of an agreement with a local hospital. The clinic sued, and judges have allowed it to continue operating. The state Supreme Court will begin hearing the case tomorrow. A high-stakes trial over closing of Kentucky's final abortion clinic ends, but the decision could take months. The clinic is challenging its state law requiring abortion clinics to have agreements with a hospital and an ambulance service in case of medical emergencies. The trial ended Friday, and it's in the judge's hands. The Holy See's top representative to the United Nations is calling on world leaders to promote peace and justice. His appeal comes as Catholic leaders gather in New York City tonight to pray ahead of the annual UN General Assembly. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby joins us now from Manhattan, just outside the church where they are meeting. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Archbishop Bernardito Alza, the Holy See's ambassador, is welcoming high-ranking officials here to the Church of the Holy Family, including UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who himself is Catholic. It comes ahead of the 72nd Annual UN General Assembly. I talked with Father Gerald Murray, the pastor here at Holy Family, who will lead the invocation tonight. He says prayer is vital to all of the representatives who will be here, Catholics and non-Catholics, because it is a reminder to everyone that they answer to a higher power.
It's also an opportunity for stirring up the conscience of each representative and then the staff that work for them, because personal integrity is necessary in their job, particularly since the lives of so many people depend on them acting honestly, justly, and righteously. So By praying, they're reminded that they have an obligation before God to act in conscience for what is truly right and just.
Now, officially, the General Assembly opens tomorrow, Tuesday, but many heads of state, like President Donald Trump, will not be delivering speeches until next week. Now, the General Assembly is the main deliberating and policy-making wing of the UN. That's where all of the member states have equal representation. Lauren?
Why, the church does not always agree with the UN on key issues, especially when it comes to abortion and birth control. Is that something Catholics there are going to be talking and praying about tonight?
Yes, Lauren, for sure. Father Murray tells me that's important the church stand up for life issues like you mentioned, as well as other issues like traditional marriage. He says there are some within the UN that will try to undermine the values that are not in line with the church. That's why it's important, he says, that tonight they pray about those issues, as well as the Holy See, to have that representation during the General Assembly to promote their values. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from New York City. Thank you, Wyatt. Up next, helping Christians in the Middle East, how an upcoming summit looks to protect religious minorities. It's been 3 months since the House passed a bill providing emergency relief for Christians in Iraq and Syria. The Senate has yet to vote on it. Our next guest will help us understand the reason why it is so important and why Christians in the Middle East need help. Joining us now, Bishop Gregory Mansoor of the Maronite Catholic Eparchy of St. Maron of Brooklyn. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Tell us what this bill will do for Christians in the region.
I know that when Chris Smith and I were walking the pro-life march, he told me he was just there in Iraq, as you have been, and he said, these Christians are all caring for themselves. Nobody's looking at them. So why shouldn't they be excluded from U.S. government money or UN money just because they're wise enough to take care of themselves? And that's what this bill is hopefully to do.
You are also on the board of In Defense of Christians, and that's a nonprofit dedicated to helping Christians in the Middle East. Tell us why the return of Christians to their communities is so important, not just for them as persons, but to help with religious dialogue in the Middle East.
Christians are the salt of the earth. That's just, I mean, I'm not I think I'm a little prejudiced, but they really are. I know that from my trips to the Middle East, they are the salt of the earth, the hospitals and nursing homes, the care facilities, the schools. And so having Christians remain in their small villages, and here's where ISIS was so clever. They knew they could go into those areas because there was no defense, and no one would speak up for them.
It's so true. We traveled through those towns. I saw some towns, here we are, completely, absolutely destroyed, bombed out. This man came back, and his entire house had been in flames. ISIS dug tunnels in his living room to hide weapons. So I know that you're going to help them by planning a summit here in Washington in October. Is it open to anyone? What's the goal?
It is, Lauren. It's open to anybody. Two goals. One, to let the media know a little bit about, as you are doing, but second, to let the halls of power in Washington know. Not to forget the evil intent of ISIS and the good intent of the Christians and other religious minorities there to live at peace with their Sunni and Shiite neighbors. So I think it's very important for us to advocate for them.
Especially because they can't really advocate for themselves here. All right. Thank you so much, Bishop. We truly, truly appreciate you coming.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you so much. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We leave you tonight with more of today's ceremonies in New York City, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C., as we remember the 16th anniversary of the September 11th terror attacks. Good night, and God bless you.
Robert J. Maxwell.
Renee A. May.
Tyrone May.
Kilroy Marcellus Maynard.